Thank you so much for inviting me. I see that you have grants from Norway, so I guess you were forced to invite someone from Norway. But anyway, I'm happy to be here. It's my first time in Ljubljana, and I came yesterday and I had the possibility to walk around a little bit. It's very, very beautiful, and I'm very happy to be here. Let me see, can you find my presentation? Then I can continue while you are.
Mm-hmm.
This is what, no.
Yeah, just press the...
This is fine. Okay, after listening to Ingolfur and to the discussion before coffee break, I really want to turn around my whole presentation because it was a very, very good and interesting discussion. A lot of very, very important issues were discussed about. And I'm very happy that it was no antagonism or huge difference between the different groups of sciences, the scientists being there. Because often we can see that scientists are used to create oppositions and antagonism between the fields when it comes to gender equality especially. But we are in a very, very changing situation when it comes to research also, especially, of course, when it comes to research in natural sciences and biology and genetics, with the introduction of epigenetics, the whole huge, long, terrible debate about inheritance and social learning is being changed absolutely and totally. When we are going into the field of epigenetics, which I find very, very, very fascinating. So perhaps I can use my slides, but then I will sort of, have some sporadic trips out of it here and there. So first of all, what is our overall goal? Why are we discussing and doing gender equality work? I think in a democratic society it must be a goal to represent all citizens fairly. That would be the message of the state. That is what we are doing when we are talking about a democratic society. Includes representation of ethnicity, minorities, class, age and gender. And when we see discrimination in these fields, they're following very much the same theories or the same logic or the same arguments. So there are no huge, when it comes to theory also, it's not a large difference between discussing anti-feminism or sexism and discussing racism and anti-immigrant discussions. It's very much connected to each other, also historically and theoretically it is. And gender representation includes equal representation of both genders, men and women, boys and girls. And I think this is very important to be aware that gender equality is fundamentally a part of building a democracy. It's not something in addition to or outside. It is a fundamental part of building a democracy. We cannot say that we have a democracy if we are not focusing on gender equality and equality between different ethnic groups. And it's also a political reason, you can say, or ideological reason why I'm saying it. Because often gender equality is discussed as an issue by and for women. Or it is discussed as something about women or for women. It's not our duties to participate in that discussion as men. This is also what was discussed before coffee break. But if you think about this as a fundamental part of democracy, of course it is a discussion that is important for everybody. It's not outside of democracy, it's inside it. And we have to know, when we're discussing these things also, that it's not only men that can be against gender equality. It's a huge amount of women that are against gender equality. It's not like it's women against men, or women on one side and men on the other side. You have a huge diversity among men, like Ingolfur was talking about. That you have diverse groups of men taking different positions in this discussion. But you have also the same differences between women. You have anti-feminist women too. And I think it's important to add that. Because the worst thing we can do when we're talking about or discussing or working in the field of gender equality is putting men on one side and women on the other side. When you go into research or you go into practice and the fields, you see that the truth is not like that. It's much more complicated. And I would like also to add one group now, which Ingolfur didn't have in his presentation, which is a new group, touched a little about it in the discussion, a new group growing in the societies, and that is a clearly anti-feminist groups. Very visible on the internet especially. And there's been a lot of discussion about this in Norway. We have always known from research that both men and women has been against, some men and women has been against gender equality. In Norway for a long time, we have that studies back to the 70s. But we have never really got to know what is the arguments of these groups. What is their sentiment in a way? How do they think? How do they feel? How do they argue? And now we see more clearly how the anti-feminist groups argue on the internet with their obviously hatred. More against women and women taking part in politics, in public debates, but also against men. So social media is a new area where you have seen a growth of anti-feminist groups also. So what is stereotyping? We have to look at, I think especially media when you're talking about stereotyping. But of course what is presented in media is also in our heads. It's a part of us. So what kind of images of women and men are presented in newspapers, television, magazines, films, advertisements? And I think it's really important to go into these areas because today we can say that, especially in Norway, we have a high level of formal gender equality. When it comes to equal pay, it's representation in finances, representation in politics, and so on and so on. But when you go into films, media, advertisements, and especially American-driven film industry, you see their production of gender unequal images all the time. If you go into a commercial area, you see a continuously growth of inequality. For example, in Norway, skiing is very, very popular. And this is, I mention it because this is the last thing I saw on the production of inequality in our images. Because 2 years ago, they introduced for the first time pink skis. So now they have blue skis and pink skis for boys and for girls. So the reproduction of the pink group and the blue group is continuously, and it's actually increasing all over the world. You go into Toys R Us, I don't know if you have this gigantic production of toys for children. When you go into Toys R Us, you will see that it's a pink area and it's a blue area. In the big commercial shop they have in Oslo, it was actually before. It was a sign on the wall, immediately when you came in, it said 4 boys that way and 4 girls that way. From the kids are very, very small. They are introduced to this world of differences. That we are 2 groups, boys there and girls here. We complained and I took down the sign. We said it is against, against the law of gender equality in Norway, and I took it down. But you don't really need to have a sign like that because everybody knows it anyway, because it's there with the colors. They had just introduced a new yogurt to have kids eating more yogurt. And how do they do it? Yes, they make tough images with strong guys for the boys, and they make some soft dolls and pink colors for the girls. And I think that girls will eat more pink yogurt and the boys will eat more blue yogurt. You know, this is ongoing manipulations of our brains and images of ourselves as men and women. So we have to be very, very aware of the commercial forces. And why do the commercial forces? I don't think they do it because of a vicious thinking. No, they have one reason for doing it. They sell more. Of course, if you have pink skis and blue skis in Norway, I mean, my son would never use my daughter's skis, you know. Before in Norway, of course, we inherit skis from each other, you know. All the kids using the same skis, but we can't do it anymore because now the boys say, no, I don't want those skis. Are you crazy? They're girl skis. I can't use them. So I have to have new skis. So you have to buy double up of everything. So this is capitalism, you know, how capitalism is reproducing, or not reproducing, but producing gender inequality. Yeah, all over the world, explicit tendency to portray stereotypical images of men and women. And more the same stereotypical images. So let me just give you a little bit of historical background of these ideas of stereotypes. Stereotypes actually developed in Europe in the 18th and 19th century. And it was very much based on the idealization of the Greek male body. Disposition of the Greek male, very strong, very in control, very self-content, autonomous, individual. So the male sort of body and mind coming together in this strong, autonomous, independent, in control new being, which is a different type of creating the new male, which was stereotyping a male body and a male mind. And of course you know also that the saying, which is a part of the Christianity learning from the 18th century and onwards, that the mind and the body should represent each other. You know, it should reflect each other. So we have to have a healthy body and a healthy mind to reflect each other. And this is a male body which is in self-control and strong body. And we often also talk about it as a hard body. If you shall be in self-control, you also have to have a hard body. A body that stands against, you know, too much impressions from others and can be tough in a way. So men strong, hard, pure. In the same time, especially during the 19th century, you had a huge development of women going more into governing of the household as mothers and housewives. And it's important to think about this as a historical development, because if you go, especially in Norway, but this was a development that started in the 19th century, but was also ongoing into the 20th century. All our countries were basically farming countries, you know. People were working in their farms, living in their farms, often more families together, could be 8 or 10 grown up, a lot of children, there in the households. And when we go back and study these farms, these households, we see that both the men and the women were very important for the economical sustenance. The women was as important as the men when it comes to surviving in the farms, you know. They had their duties in the farm as the men had their duties. And we also, which I studied the history of fatherhood the last few years, and I see that in that period, a lot of the fathers was much closer to and taking much more care of their children. I have research showing that the fathers were, in many times, part of delivery. You know, when the babies were born, the fathers and the mothers were there together, you know, in the farms, because all the birth giving was in the farms, on the farm. What happened when you had the slowly development of modernity in the 19th century was that you started to differentiate between men's and women's duties and obligations and roles. So the idealization of the mother that we know a lot about from Europe and other countries. In Europe, it started actually as late as in the 1880s, 1890s. I can't find any real historical documents showing the idealization of the mother in the households before late 19th century. But it was increasing idealization of the mothers during the beginning of the 20th century. So what happened here in this 100 years period? You develop a complementary system, you know? The fathers now becoming more and more the responsibility for the workforce, to be the provider of the house. The mother more and more becoming the one taking care of the house, as the mother, as the housewife, and so on. And at the same time, you have then a homogenizing of the groups, men as men, women as women, on opposite sides. I will also mention, which is important, that when you're talking about stereotypes, we will always also have the other side, which is called the countertypes. Stereotyping is also producing the countertypes. The countertypes are those who can't live up to the ideal defined by the stereotypes. In the period, in the first period here, when we started discussing the stereotypes from the 18th and 19th century, the typical countertypes were the Jew or the black, especially. It could be all other ethnicities. In Norway, it was the Sami people that was the countertype, because they were the ethnic minority of Norwegians. So it's a lot of studies in the 19th century showing how the Sami people were smaller, have a different body, a different brain, smaller brains, and so on and so on. You had these studies during the whole 19th century. Producing stereotypes, producing countertypes. And what is the idea and importance with countertypes? Is of course that you can tell men that you have to be aware of not falling into the countertype. Especially during the 19th century, when you have typical countertypes like the drinker, the gambler, the effeminate, the unmanly. So these countertypes was used rhetorically to keep men going as men, in control, strong, hard, to be sure not to fall out into being a countertype like the drinker or the gambler, or the effeminate, especially late 19th century, the effeminate, the homosexual came into being. Homosexuality was a word first used in 1880s in Europe. Came into different languages, actually as late as the beginning of the 20th century. It's a very late idea of a human being, the homosexual. But from that on, especially the effeminate and the homosexual has been a sort of a countertype that has been used heavily rhetorically for boys. To stay into line of being the tough guy, you know? If you're a little bit too effeminate, you can be harassed, put off. You're not a man enough, you're not man anymore, and so on and so on. And you have hundreds, thousands of examples of these harassment of boys. And we know also from prison studies, from addiction studies, that a lot of these guys, they have a school history which is very, very tough to read and to go into. Being harassed, being heavily harassed for being not manly enough or boy enough. So it's very, very important to be aware of this relationship between men and how men are fighting against each other in a way and creating the losers of men. And it's not only about men and women, it's a lot about men and men also. You also have female countertypes like the too sexual, very, very important countertype in the 19th century. The sexual woman, the sexual active woman, the desiring woman, the dangerous woman. And you also had then, later on in the 20th century, the working woman as a countertype. There's a lot of discussion, especially in the 50s in Norway, because in the 1950s is the time when the less amount of women were working had a paid job in Norway. Only 5% of women in Norway had a paid job in the 1950s. It's never been so low before or after. And at that period, a working woman was a really, really strange creature, you know, meeting a lot of harassment in the neighborhood and from others, you know. Why did she work? Was there something problem with the man here? Couldn't he, you know, afford to pay for the family and so on? So we also have female countertypes. The hysteric, you know, the bad mother, of course. So we have to bear how we're producing, when we are stereotyping, we're also producing countertypes. Just give you a small picture of what I call the dual family system in Norway, which is important because this is the production of the gender equality system we know, and the production of the images of the gender equality system that we know, not only in Norway, but most of Europe. Because this is the most stereotypical period in Norwegian history, and we find it also in many other countries, the same thing. In my research on fatherhood, I've taken it back especially to the discussion and implementation of the new marriage law in 1927. It's interesting that a lot of countries in Europe, they implement the new marriage law in this period. And they had to because of the inequality system when it comes to inheritance and it comes to the right of children. Because in the older patriarchal system that all the European countries had, the fathers actually had all the rights, you know. They had the rights to the children. They had the rights to decide over the economy. They had the rights to her inheritance, you know. If she was coming from a rich family, it went to the husband, you know. So he sort of decided, and people started seeing that in the early 20th century, that we have to do something about it. It's a problem, and it's especially a problem that if the woman is leaving the husband, she cannot bring the children with me because the children belongs to the husband. I guess all of you have read or seen A Doll's House, Henrik Ibsen's famous play, you know, where Nora is leaving, in the end, she's leaving Helmer. And she is all over the world. I mean, she's one of the feminists' heroes, you know, one of the women's liberation heroes. And it's played, you know, very popular all over, and especially now in Eastern Asia, it's played a lot with huge applauses. But it's interesting to see that when she's leaving her 2 children behind. So Helmer is in a way the lucky guy here, you know, because he has the possibility to stay at home together with his 2 children and have a good life and have the ability to come closer to his children when Nora is leaving. You know, this would be impossible today. This is not happening anymore. Now it is the other way around. No, men has to leave and the women are staying there together with their children at home. I have in my research, I've called this the period of mother in the family and father for the family. Actually, father is outside of the family. He's not a part of the family. He's only there for the family, producing for the family. Going out, working, coming tired at home, giving the money for basically to support and support the family. He's the provider. That's his role in the history of this time. And I think a lot of you know about this history. My father was like that. I didn't really know my father, you know, because he was out working all the time. But the family existed of mothers. And I remember all the mothers around in my neighborhood, you know, because they were there at home together with the children playing. The fathers were out there somewhere, not taking part. So the home loses meaning for men. And this is also relating to the historical backgrounds, because the home in the 19th century was a home for both fathers and mothers. They were both there at home. But in this period, the fathers are leaving the home in a way. It's a cultural exile for men in that period. And it's also what's important, it's a modern gender division of labor. In this new family system, mothers are contributing with their taking care of the children, taking care of the household, taking care of the husband when he's coming tired home. Giving him food, feeding him, making him productive, you know, making him able to go out in the morning and work more. That's her contribution. His contribution is money. So together they are sort of equal, legally equal in that system. What is interesting for everybody to think and know is that this is actually a historical, ideological, and the most constructionist family pattern in the world. Because you don't know about this family pattern if you go earlier back in time. So this is a very ideological created family system with a dual gendered system. And I think this is a lot what we are struggling with when we are now discussing gender equality. We're discussing the participation of the women in workforce. I mean, the women were economically important when you go back to the 19th century. At the farm. And in the household. When it comes to economy and survival. So she was thrown out of economy, while the man was thrown out of the family. Now we are trying to replace this ugly structure of the history. Sexualization, there's a few words. I think perhaps the two most important areas to work with today for me would be sex and violence. That's the two most damaging and difficult areas when it comes to growing up as a gendered being and being together. It's more than just a happy kiss, Ingolfur. So main changes today when it comes to stereotyping is the sexualization of the bodies. And especially, of course, sexualization of the female body, but not only the female body, also the male body. And we see now more and more that young men are also having some of the same problems that we have known that young girls have for the last decades, unsatisfaction with their own bodies. We see more and more men also have the same problems. More psychological deep problems, which also leading them to doing some of the same things, eating problems. They go to different types of therapies. They use construction, they're constructing their bodies in clinics and so on. So we see here that in this area, both men and women are a part of this new type of sexualization. Sex sells, so that's also part of the commercial industry. But let me give just a few examples from Norway for how stereotyping functions, because this is interesting. Prime Minister Gro Harlem Brundtland, as you all know. When she came into power as the first female prime minister in Norway in 1982. Okay, sorry about that. It was a lot of discussion around Gro that she was too masculine. And I guess you have perhaps had these discussions also here in Slovenia. Luckily, we can say this is discussion we don't have anymore. So it shows that, if you continuously work in this area, we change in them, we also change in the mind of the people. No one today says that the party leaders, the female party leaders, are too masculine anymore. They will not use that type of, perhaps you can say, stereotyping, and also we can say harassment. But this is a way of using stereotypical ideas of gender. We had a very, very interesting discussion in Norway with Foreign Minister Knut Vollebæk from the Christian Democracy. He was laughing too much. And that's interesting, he's a happy guy. He's a Christian, so of course he's a happy guy. Yeah, he was the Foreign Minister of Norway. And suddenly, on one of the main newspapers in Norway, the whole first page, it was this message that Knut Vollebæk is laughing too much. And what is the problem with that? Yeah, the problem is that Norway will not be taken seriously in foreign policy anymore. We have lost position in foreign policy because of this happy guy. And what's the problem? Because a man is not supposed to laugh. Especially when you're dealing with tough politics. You have to be tough, you have to be hard. You have to be in control, and laughing too much is a show that you're not in control of yourself. You're losing control. And of course, you also got the discussion perhaps here. It's the typical discussion when it comes to men and emotions. But this is a very interesting story about the US Liberal and Speaker of the House, John Boehner. He was crying too much You know, he was holding this speech for more than an hour in the house, and he started crying, and he was crying and crying. And it's a huge discussion in the U.S. paper, especially, but it spread out all over the world that this guy was crying too much. He got very emotional about his own speech. But this is the typical, debate about men and emotions, that we are not crying enough. And the whole idea of the boys, being beaten if they start crying. You should not cry, stop crying. You have to be a tough guy. And of course, crying is one of the basic emotions we all have. And men has, for the last 150 years, not been allowed to cry. And I tell you, I've been studying the history of tears. And if you go back to the antique period, to the old antique heroes like Achilles and all those guys, they were crying a lot. It's a beautiful, beautiful passage in the Iliad, Homer's Iliad, when Patroclus, Achilles' good friend, good body, is killed. Then Achilles is withdrawing from the war, and he starts crying. He sits crying on the beach day after day. And he cries so much that the whole army, is feeling with him, and they start crying. And it says they cry so much that new rivers were formed running into the ocean of the Mediterranean. So this is, and we can follow this history of crying and history of male tears all the way until the late 19th century, when the new idea of the new bourgeoisie family came up, and men should be in control. The Romantic period in the early 19th century, men were crying a lot. They have meetings where they were sitting, discussing and crying together. So this is a new thing, that boys should not cry. But it's a heavy, heavy, tough thing for boys, because we all want to cry, now and then. Yeah. Let me add, I would like, because of the discussion, I would also like to add 2 other stereotypes that I didn't bring with me here, but I would very much like to add also the idea of the violent men. Actually, one emotion that is allowed for men is aggression. Men should be able any time to show aggression. And men should be able to, at any time, be able to take up guns and start shooting each other. This is the part of the national army system. At any time when we are called upon, men should be able to get out and shoot and kill. This is a part of being a man in the societies in the modern world. This is what we are taught to do, So this is a part of our body, a part of our system, the idea of men as potential violent men. And that violence also actually pays. I hope I have 1 more minute. I will really like to tell you a very, very interesting story. Because a friend of mine, he's a psychotherapist in my town, and he told me this story about one boy, especially, who is very, very clearly in this, what it's all about, 15 years old, he was in therapy because he was very violent. And what is his story? You will know it, The story of the boy is that he was harassed. He was a small boy, weak boy. He was harassed a lot, pushed around, marginalized among the boys, outside of society. And where do he go? Yeah, he finds some people that want to take him in, And that's a gang of other tough guys, tough boys, taking him in and treating him well and learning him to be a tough guy, and then they're sending him out again. So now it's your turn, to do the duty. You have to go out and you have to beat another boy. You have to show that you're a tough guy. So he goes out in the schoolyard and he decides he finds a boy just to prove that he can be a member of the gang, So he goes out there and he beat up another boy, tough and hard. And what's interesting is what he's saying in therapy. He's saying that, actually, what I have to admit is that this is the first time I really felt that I was something. This is the first time in my life that was happy. And what he saw was that people started respecting him, looking up to him, being afraid of him. He was something suddenly. So he became the toughest guy in the gang, beating up others very violently and very, very hard. I think this is a very, very typical story of what's happening with boys, and why at least some boys and men are starting being violent. I will also very shortly then also say about fathers, because this is also very, very stereotypical. You know, in many societies, now we have changed it in Norway, luckily, and in Iceland too, that it's possible for fathers to be caring, lovely, close to their children, kissing and hugging and being bodily very close. But that wasn't like that 30 years ago. And in many societies, still not like that men can be very close to their children. But I think you know, what is caring about? What is taking care of your children about? I think it's about love. And if you think that you have a sort of an area of love over there, men have been here looking at mothers and children being there together, loving each other, caring for each other. You know, children are very, very discriminatory. They don't care. I mean, if a child falls down and hurt itself, it doesn't just run to the first one. You know, if the father is there, come, I can take care. No, mother. You know, he's running over here into love area. Because that's where, you know, love is. And I know a lot of men, you know, talking about this, that are outside of love. Love is there, I'm here. And I think this is what we are gaining with getting caring fathers, you know, fathers into the area of taking care of their children, why paternal leave is so, so important. Because now when the fathers first are here, in this area of love, you can't stop loving. It's as easy as that. When you start loving your children, you cannot stop it. You cannot just walk out of it anymore, you know. You are there, you're in love, you're part of love. And it creates and changes your mind dramatically. So fatherhood is also an area of stereotypical things that we can change, and we see that we are changing it when we're doing work with fathers. And I will also, it was a question about development theory and things like that, about the importance of children when they're 3 years old. I have to say that from reading a lot of development theories and psychological theories about children, that every day of a child's life is crucial. Every day. The first day is important. The second day is important. Every day is important. I mean, it's the worst thing you can read is that when they are 3 years old, it's an important period of their life. It's not like that. First half years, 1 year, 2 years, all days are important in the development of a child's life. And we see that, especially within the area of development theories and connection theories and relationship theories, they're changing because practice is changing. It's not like a child is not able to connect to more than one person, you know. Children is loving the one who is loving them. It's very easy. You can have 2 people loving children. It's better for children. You can have 3 people loving children. It's better for the children. You can have 4, you know. You can have many. And the children will love it. It's very easy when it comes to children's way of development. Okay, let me go to some conclusions before I end. So, what I said, both genders shall be equally represented. Very important. And both genders shall be equally represented in the work on gender equality. It cannot only be gender equality for women. It's not only for women. And that's why I'm very critical against campaigns like he for her campaigns. I'm very critical on that. Because it's not about he for her. You will never be able to recruit men into such a campaign. Because it's he and her for both. Because we're talking about life quality. And we know that life quality, as Ingolf was very, very, very clear on, life quality is improving for both men and women in gender equality situations. In gender equality families, in gender equality societies. All research shows that it improves the life quality. And especially of the children. Not as stereotypes or countertypes, not as representatives of a gendered group, which is important. We are never men only or women only, you know. We are continuous different types of individuals. And that is important, that we are individuals here we are not different groups. I think that was it. Yes, that was it. Thank you so much.